Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event. That song that you've just heard, it's called It's the Debt That You Owe, We Won't Pay. And it's by an artist called Arawa. And Arawa is an artist and activist who uses music to create community and change. It's a song that recognizes the context for debt, and it's based on a long history of colonialism and slavery, and that the responsibility for climate breakdown is in the global north. So we're just sharing Arawa's social media and website details in the chat box if you want to find out more about their work and their music. And yeah, so I just want to say a really warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight at our rally, Resisting the Global Debt Crisis. It's amazing to see so many of you in this Zoom call this evening. And if you feel comfortable, I can see that some people have done it already, but please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, add your name, say where you're from, because we'd love to get an idea of where people are joining from this evening. My name is Heidi Chow, and I'm the Executive Director at Debt Justice. And for those of you who are not familiar with our work, we're a campaigning organisation based here in the UK, and we exist to end unjust debt and its root causes. We work closely with people and organisations that are campaigning against unjust debt in their own countries. And tonight's rally is all about platforming their activism and resistance, and how we in the UK can stand in solidarity with all of these efforts. Now, this is a joint event tonight that we're hosting together with our friends at Debt for Climate, who we absolutely love working with. And so I'm just going to introduce you to Lorraine, who will be co-hosting this event with me this evening. And Lorraine will just introduce a little bit about the work of Debt for Climate.
Hi, yes, thanks, Heidi. I'm Lorraine, and again, welcome to this webinar. I am a global facilitator at Debt for Climate, and we are a global grassroots movement of movements, uniting social, labour, Indigenous and climate justice groups across the world. Our mission is single-focused, but incredibly urgent. Our mission, it's incredibly urgent to cancel the illegitimate debts burdening global South countries so they can focus on a self-determined just transition and build climate resilience. We believe that true climate justice cannot happen without debt justice, and that means challenging this exploitative debt system. Thank you. Back to you, Heidi.
Thank you, Lorraine. Yeah, so I'm just going to kick off this evening by just saying a few words of introduction about this event. Because right now we're in the worst global debt crisis for about 30 years, and it's having a really profound impact on people's lives. There are about 54 countries in a debt crisis right now, and in Africa, 34 countries are currently spending more on debt repayments than on health and education. Now, since the start of the pandemic, our research has shown that debt repayments for the 50 most climate vulnerable countries have doubled. In fact, lower income countries are spending 5 times more on debt repayments than fighting the climate crisis. And today's debt crisis has been many years in the making. Its roots can be traced right back to colonialism, where Western countries like the UK shaped the economies of the countries that they colonised in order to provide them with raw materials. Now, during independence, many former colonies inherited weak economies, and then they had to survive in a global economy where the rules on things like trade, finance, and tax were set up in the interests of rich countries. And if you add to this years of irresponsible lending by unscrupulous banks, then all it takes is an external shock to plunge countries into a debt crisis. And we've had plenty of shocks in the last few years, from the pandemic to global wars to food and fuel price shocks and the climate crisis as well. But the international processes that are supposed to help lower income countries in debt crisis are simply not working. Activists are taking to the streets and demanding an end to unjust debts. In recent years and months, we've seen protests around the world in response to the devastating impacts of the debt crisis. And this week, debt campaigners are joining forces in a show of resistance against the highly damaging lending policies of the 2 big development banks, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, in the 80th year of these institutions. Now, this resistance gives us reason to be hopeful, and that's why we're here. Around the world, people are fighting back. And in the UK, we have a really big opportunity to turn the tide on unjust debt, because 9 out of 10 debt contracts between financial firms and the lowest income countries are overseen by UK law. And a change of the law here in the UK could actually have a really big impact for countries in a debt crisis. We'll talk a little bit more on this later. But in the meantime, I'm really excited about our lineup tonight. We are joined by some really inspiring debt campaigners and activists who are at the forefront of fighting for debt justice. They'll be talking about their own experiences of living in countries that are in crisis and how they're resisting. And as well as hearing from an amazing lineup of speakers, we'll also be bringing you some spoken word and poetry contributions. Art often plays a major role in activism, and we really hope that you'll enjoy these performances tonight as well. Now, we've asked each of our speakers to keep their speeches to 5 minutes. We've got a lot to fit in tonight, and we want to make sure that we hear from all of them. So we may have to remind our speakers of this if they're going over time. But we'll also have some time at the end of the call to put your questions to our speakers. So if you think of questions for them during this call, then feel free to pop them in the Q&A box. And then we'll get, hopefully we'll get these questions to our speakers at the end. We'll also be recording the rally tonight, and we'll send everyone on our mailing list a link to this recording after the event. So first up, I am going to pass you to our very first speaker, Sharda Ganga. Sharda is a director of Projekta, Suriname. It's a human rights-based civil society organization focusing on the interlinkage between human rights, democracy, and governance, with a specific focus on women's rights and gender equality. Projekta is also the founder and coordinator of the Citizens Initiative for Participation and Good Governance, which is the largest civil society platform in Suriname. Sharda is also a playwright and a newspaper columnist. So I'm really excited to be handing over to you, Sharda. I'll give you the floor now.
Thank you, Heidi, and everybody. Good evening, and thanks for having me. All the way from Suriname, which is a tiny country right above Brazil, for those who never heard of us before. And we are usually not the topic on the world stage, but all this has changed in the past years. First, we became one of the most indebted countries, a victim of volatile international commodity markets as much as of national bad governance. Then, in the midst of that debt crisis, we struck offshore oil. In the 4 years since, we have lived in this dual reality. On the one hand, the present with an austerity program based on the usual measures dictated by one of the world's biggest development banks, the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, as we call it, and its usual which reached its usual havoc on people's lives, while at the same time we are living towards a bright future in which abundant oil revenues will solve all of our problems and benefit us all, as our politicians promise. The one group that has already guaranteed its benefits from these future oil revenues are our private creditors, the bondholders. They held out in debt restructuring negotiations with Suriname for an amazingly sweet deal in which they lay claim to our future oil revenues through a value recovery instrument. The debt restructuring thus resulted in even higher paybacks for them than the original loan agreement. And if all goes to their plan, up to 30% of the royalties from our first oil field will go directly to our creditors until the year 2050. We, like many other Latin American countries, will thus have to keep extracting our natural resources in order to pay off foreign debt. We will even have to keep borrowing when climate change hits us hard, and thus keep extracting oil to pay those debts, and so the vicious circle continues. There is a word for that historical global system in which the global north benefits the most from the natural resources of the global south, isn't there? Our right to self-determination is violated in an even more profound way. In order to safeguard this windfall, the agreement with the bondholders is dependent upon Suriname making very specific changes to the legislation of our Sovereign Wealth Fund by December this year. If the legislation is not passed according to the agreement with bondholders, the interest rate on the value recovery instrument will increase. Foreign bodies again dictate how to use our resources. They even dictate our legislation. This is the new form of colonialism, using debt to gain access to our resources. How do you fight this, we wondered? The austerity measures have had a deep impact on the lives of people in Suriname. They sent the country into political, economic, and social chaos with protests and uprisings in 2020 and 2023, when people had had enough of the impacts of the debt crisis and stormed the parliament demanding change. Colonialism is a resilient beast, still echoing true in our present. Healthcare has collapsed, medicines are scarce, and operating rooms empty for a lack of materials and of qualified personnel, as essential workers, such as teachers and healthcare workers, leave the country in droves, poached by institutions in the Netherlands or former colonizer who has an urgent need for teachers and care workers who speak Dutch. For years, we here thought that there was nothing we could do, that we had to fight locally against our government's bad habits, but that there was no way we could change the IMF, the World Bank, or fight the financial capital system in which irresponsible and corrupt governments can keep borrowing from greedy private lenders who only think of their bottom line. But then we met people like our hosts and our other speakers in virtual rooms across the globe. It was then that we realized that there is hope, that our problem is not just a problem of local bad governance and governments, but that we have had but that we have inherited a historical problem. We should not take away the responsibility and accountability of irresponsible, selfish, short-sighted, and corrupt governments at home. But we should most certainly not stop there. As long as they can keep borrowing, they will. So together, let's stop irresponsible lending and borrowing. It is crucial for countries like Suriname that legislation in, for example, the UK that oversees the practices of private lenders is signed. And we are therefore so very grateful to have you all on our side. Thank you.
Just trying to unmute myself there. Thanks, Sharda, for sharing. This is a powerful and eye-opening and a stark reminder of why the fight for debt justice is so urgent and how crucial solidarity is in challenging this system. So next we are going to hear from Melani Gunathilaka in Sri Lanka. Melani is a climate and political activist, a human rights defender, a writer and an activist with Debt Climate. Over to you, Melani.
Thank you so much for having me today. And just to give a brief idea of how Sri Lanka got here today. Sri Lanka is a country that was formerly colonized by 3 colonizers. And when the colonizers left us, they did leave us with their own systems and their own model of development. And with that, we were forced into this perpetuating cycle of debt that made us indebted to not only developed countries in the West, but also to organizations, multilateral organizations like IMF and the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. And fast forward to 2022, we had an uprising of the people. There were millions of people who were protesting against the then government. The key demand was asking for the president to step down, but there were also other demands. Like one of the major demand was asking to give our stolen money back, and people also asked for right to life, and all of that happened as a result of continuous struggles of the farmers, of the teachers, and student activists, environmentalists. All of them continued to protest against the government's actions that were being taken. So just to circle back a little bit, in 2007, that's when Sri Lanka first went to international sovereign bond market, and that was a decision that was promoted in Sri Lanka, like especially for the decision makers, as something that would support the country. But actually what happened was we got into this cycle of debt where Sri Lanka ended up taking loans at very high interest rates. And also, so what led to Sri Lanka's foreign currency reserves to deplete in 2022 was actually servicing an ISP and also servicing some of the domestic debt in 2021. So leading, which like all of these incidents that led to the bankruptcy of Sri Lanka, then ended up the country losing its food security. The government took very harsh decisions in also showcasing these decisions as something environmental friendly or green transitions, but there was no consultation with the farmers or the people who were victims of this. So so there were a lot of urban population who joined the protests as well. And by July 2022, we managed to chase away the existing president, but then the parliament managed to install a president who was part of the previous parliament and who decided to go ahead with the IMF agreement. And with the IMF agreement, the Sri Lankan people, we experienced lack of transparency massively. very few people of the population speaks English, but there was never any communication from the IMF to the people using local languages. So people were clueless. It was just presented as the only solution that we had in order to get away from the crisis that we were in. And out of many issues that we had to face with the IMF austerity scheme, I'd like to highlight one of them. That was the cuts from the EPF, or slashing the EPF benefits, or the social security funds, because as part of the discussions, IMF bailout package, it included provisions for restructuring both domestic and foreign debt, emphasizing the need for a holistic approach. So what the government did was, without slashing any debt taken from the private creditors for domestic debt, they went and slashed benefits that people were supposed to receive from the social security, that is the EPF funds. And we had a president who was harsh, who repressed dissent, who was bringing in laws to curtail fundamental freedoms of the people, freedom of association, freedom of speech. These were done through legislations that were undemocratic and didn't abide by the constitution of the country. But just last month, 2 years after the uprising, the Aragalaya, we finally got the chance to vote for a new government. And now we have a new government in place, but they inherit a country which has high inflation rates. So by end of 2020, the inflation rate of country Sri Lanka was 12%, but inflation by mid-2020 was close to 70%. And food insecurity of Sri Lanka still suggests that about 4 million people are still food insecure. And this also goes to show that Sri Lanka, like the demands of the people who are asking for a GDP to be allocated for education, Sri Lanka allocates one of the lowest GDP for education in South Asia as well. And with all of this, we have now reached to a point where we have a new government, or at least a new president and a prime minister, but we are still to vote in a new parliament. And just 2 days before the presidential election, the previous president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, ended up agreeing to restructure international sovereign bond restructuring. They agreed to restructure their main principle. But the problem is the haircut Sri Lanka is getting in this debt agreement is not at all sufficient. And also there's this clause about changing laws, because currently over 50% of our ISB is ruled under US law, but they're asking to change that because the laws in the UK and the US are being changed. So there's this stronghold, or the chokehold of debt holders and the countries in and also the wealthy countries who continue to pollute the earth, where countries like Sri Lanka is taking the brunt of this pollution as a country that is most vulnerable to climate change as well. So I think it's one of our key demands. And not only as a Sri Lankan activist here, but also as an activist with Debt to Climate and an activist with Yukti Sri Lanka, I am demanding that our debt will be cancelled, so Sri Lankan people are given the chance to make decisions that are good for us, decisions that will allow us to make sustainable decisions, make people-centric green transitions that are decided by the people of Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melani, for sharing that the situation in Sri Lanka. I think the case of Sri Lanka really demonstrates how debt repayments have been elevated above the needs of people really appreciate all the work that you're doing with Debt for Climate in Sri Lanka. We just want to send our solidarity to you in Sri Lanka. And also thank you for that update on the latest political situation in Sri Lanka, because I know you've recently had a change of government, as you've mentioned. And also just thank you for staying up so late. It's just to let you know, in Sri Lanka it's about 10:30 in the evening, so thank you for staying up so late to join us, Melani. So our next contribution is actually a performance piece by the Mokashi Trust School, which is a large community school in rural Zambia. Now, the students in this video are Helen Chibale, Lydia Mulundika, Elizabeth Mayanda, Tina Zulu, Maliwa Kutempa. And the background to this video is that the grade 10 students in the Mokashi Trust School were set a project to work in groups to create a poem about how their lives had been affected by debt and colonialism. And then the students voted for the best one. And so this is the winning piece. And just to let you know that this school has no electricity or internet. And so turning this poem into a video was very challenging. But we think this is an amazing piece, a really brilliant one. So we want to share it with you this evening. So we hope you enjoy it.
Our theme is Good afternoon, everyone. Our theme is how colonialism and debt has affected education in sub-Saharan Africa. And our poem is entitled
Education Colonized.
Diverting resources away from education infrastructure, restricted access to education, but only for the local population. Their aim was to train, not educate. Mother tongue not taught. Our minds so delicate learnt arithmetics in a language we knew not. Mother tongue being forgotten every hour.
This has made sub-Saharan Africa reliant on African aid financing with resource exploitation and resource diversion. They geared education towards labor force for resource extraction. Austerity measures led to overcrowded classrooms and reduction in teachers' salaries. This has caused a decline in the quality of African education, and therefore colonialism and debt have affected African education and still have the negative impact of African education.
From restricted access to education for the local population to creating a large division for educational system, focused on European history, culture and language, Eurocentric curriculum, the African education it marginalizes. They underinvested the educational infrastructure and resources for Africans. Later on, qualified teachers it lacked.
They disrupted the traditional African system of knowledge transfer, education structured in favor of colonial power with a debt-rating budget constraints. Qualified teachers were difficult to hire. Means of improving our education was taken for debt settlement. The imposition of a European language as a medium created a language barrier for many in Africa,
hindering their access to education and perpetuating education inequalities, with debt being a significant obstacle to achieving education-related sustainable development. Social hierarchies were enforced by colonialism with a dependence on external funding. This led to a lack of autonomy. Children despising their culture and speaking ill of their culture.
And our names are
Maliwa Kutempa,
Helen Chibale,
Elizabeth Mayanda,
Lydia Mulundika,
Tina Zulu. And together we say,
thank you.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. And I bet you if we were in an in-person meeting right now, we'd all be clapping and whooping and cheering, because I certainly am. That's such an amazing spoken word contribution. And we just want to say thank you so much to Mokashi Trust School, to Helen, Lydia, Elizabeth, Tina and Maliwa. You are absolute legends. Just a really quick reminder to add your questions to the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end. So our next speaker is somebody who may be familiar to you if you receive our debt justice emails, and that's Bernard Anaba. Bernard has been at the forefront of much of our campaigning for a new debt justice law in the UK over the past year. We've been working really closely with Bernard, who we absolutely love. And we really love the work that he's doing with ISODEC in Ghana. ISODEC stands for the Integrated Social Development Centre in Ghana. So I'm going to hand over, the spotlight to Bernard now to talk a little bit to us about the situation in Ghana.
Thank you, Heidi, and good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to have the platform to share Ghana's about Ghana. So I work for ISODEC, and ISODEC started as a service delivery providing social services for communities. And we realized that this is, after some time, realized this is not what we should be doing. We should be advocating for the government to do more for these communities by advocating for policy changes and for more government budget allocations to social services. The more we did our budget analysis to find out how much government to allocate to social services, the more we realized that the numbers did not add up, which means that the government was not receiving enough revenues in order to distribute, to provide enough social services to the communities that we advocate for. Then we began to look at the issue of tax justice to see how we can whip up more contributions to the national budget for to increase the national cake for distribution. And the more we did that, we still realized that that wasn't still adding up in terms of we never getting enough tax revenue to be able to distribute for social services. We also realized that in terms of debt services, so much was going into debt services. And particularly, we also realized that after the mid-2000s, when Ghana was one of the countries that benefited from debt relief, which meant that majority of our debt was cancelled, and the country was in a position to start on a good leaf. But very quickly, things did not come good. The country faced significant debt problems, which meant that by the 2013, 2014, we had to go back to the IMF again. And since then, the economic situation in terms of the debt has piled up and things hasn't really worked well. But in 2022, it even got worse, which meant that the Ghana has to default. And the more you analyze the situation, you realize that it is not only just about financial prudence, because most of the time when we advocate, we try to get the government to do the right things, to spend wisely and not to waste money in terms of expenditure. But the more we did, I realized that the issue is more structural and colonial. The economy is not in the position, no matter how hard we try to produce enough revenues for distribution. And in terms of the structure of the economy, based on basically raw commodities for export, is not able to do that. So we began to look also deeply into the debt crisis and realize that this is an area that is really affecting government's ability to deliver social services. So in 2022, when the debt crisis actually hit, government was spending close to 1/3 of its revenue to service debt, which brought untold hardship onto Ghanaians. And that really also brought about a series of protests in Ghana. Citizens began to realize that, look, things are not getting any better as much as they try to force the government to do the right things. There were a series of protests, particularly the government also tried to shore up its revenue. That's in the later part of 2022 to introduce more taxes to be able to show up its revenue. That led to a series of protests. Citizens really protested against the tax measure, which the government had to back down. But it also did not mean that things got any better. You had a number of protests in terms of labor unions protesting for improved payment and improved salaries. That also, affected so much. And the debt, when Ghana defaulted, what really happened is that inflation shot up to about 50%, which means that cost of living escalated. Fuel prices was beyond the purchasing power of the ordinary citizen. Food prices were up. The city up to date has the city has deflated up to about 100% up to now in terms of by 2022, the city was about 9 cedis to $1. Now it's close to 16 cedis to $1. So things has really got very bad. And the protests also meant that in terms of the government restructuring agenda, in terms of the debt bailout that the government sought with the IMF, meant that some local bondholders and some pension funds were going to lose some money. And they all protested, a lot of protests on the street. It took several weeks of protests for the government to back down on some demands, but that wasn't enough. It meant that the hardship also made a lot of people to resort to all sorts of ways to survive. And recently, one of the protests that really galvanized, that really took over the country was the protest against Galamsey. Galamsey is a phenomenon of illegal mining where people go into the forest areas, particularly forests and the pristine areas of the hinterland, to mine for gold. And this phenomenon even became too much for the vegetation, in the sense that most of the streams and water bodies that Ghanaians depended on all got polluted to the extent that water wasn't wholesome for Ghanaians any longer. So people actually protested for the government to sit up and to abolish put a moratorium on mining in general, so that the illegal mining will also stop alongside. That even led to the arrest of about 50 protested. Currently, some of them are even still in the custody of the government for unholy behavior. So the crisis is still raging on, and what the government kept assuring Ghanaians in terms of reaching some agreement with bilateral and private creditors on some debt relief, but it's often just remain agreement in principle, but we are not really seeing the real outcome in terms of how it's relieving Ghanaians of the hardship. So it is a situation that we continue to advocate, and as we speak, there are a lot of agitations to protest against hardship in the economy. If you walk on the streets of Ghana, you see the evidence of homelessness that has increased beyond what it used to be. So the debt crisis, as we said, as much as we also protest and put pressure on the government, we also do realize that things are not getting any better, because sometimes it is out of the hand of the government because of the nature of the situation being structural and being colonial, in the sense that it also requires external government in terms of where Ghana got its loans, in terms of where Ghana contracted its loans, so that governments will also be able to put pressure on the creditors, especially the private creditors, that often held up the negotiations on debt relief arrangements. And that has really dragged all this process for all this while. So we think that it would be good if we are able to get, particularly for the UK government, where most of Ghana's creditors, or Ghana borrowed most of its loan, so that it enforces responsible lending, putting in place a legislation to enforce responsible lending, and also to put in place a debt resolution process which allows countries, developing countries, to be able to quickly resolve the debt issues when the situation arises. So those are some of our demands that we would like external governments to also support the people of Ghana to be able to overcome. Thank you, and thank you for your audience.
Thank you, Bernard. It's another incredible insight to just the serious debt crisis that is happening. And you can see a link that is shared in the chat. So you can sign Bernard's letter to the government, which is calling for a new debt justice law here in the UK. Please share this with your friends and networks. It's important that we we get this law through. Debt Justice has been lobbying on this quite hard. So next, we are really pleased to be joined by CJ Simon, as a spoken words artist who's going to perform a piece for us entitled Change and Chains. CJ Simon is a Black British writer and academic, playwright, spoken word artist, essayist, videographer, and podcaster who uses multidisciplinary approaches to create politically engaging and challenging work. His writing has been performed across the UK, including at Southwark Playhouse and Birmingham Hippodrome, and he founded the company Fire and Folly Theatre. The spoken word poetry you're about to hear explores the complicated history of the colonised world, debt, and the British Empire by framing the history in the language of everyday relationships. The floor is yours, CJ.
Thank you. You wanted to be king of a house, but it felt too small. Burdened by the emptiness of your white walls, alone couldn't keep securities falling, so you do what all men do, what men do daily. Beef up your prestige and get you a lady. That's when you sought her out, caught her in your leased out car, barter with my grandfather and sold him the stars, tied the noose around her finger and coveted your claim. If not by canon, then you count on laws and concepts foreign to her name to keep this West Coast queen in your Westphalian game. Thinking Mumsy might love being your plaything. She didn't. She was there, tired, tied to the hob. You stood hoping she'd liven your stock, warm your icy empire with the heat from her pot, while she feeds her kids with the collard greens from her plot. And you're shocked she don't smile, as your beast of burden, sweating your sugar, your cotton, your bourbon, unthanked and unpaid, your smiling servant, barely a person, and still, you ain't pleased by her service? 'Cause the walls are still empty, threats still surface. Heard of moguls in the east coming to steal your purse, so you dig your heels in. You make her bore you a sun that never sets. Her skin now burned under the friction of your empty sex. As your kingdom begins to melt under the weight of your debt, she tried to tell me, your child, this ain't as good as it gets. But there was more to life than empty shelves, precarity, and death. She tried to give me hope, but her strength wavered. Forced daisies from her, took all that she gave you, as much for the paper, stripped her completely to sell her flavor. Left her naked and barren, unable to wake up. This is what you did to my mother, my maker. Couldn't give her the divorce. That'd be too easy. She filled your walls, so you built more. Of course, she wanted to leave because your hunger grew so large, nothing could appease it. So you find new ways to suck blood from my mother's teat, beat her black, applied the plaster and worked her to the sleeve, cut her skin, wore her thin, then gave her berries to eat. She'd throw them up, but just enough she could just about stand on her feet. She had so much life to give, and you don't even grieve. Not for her or for my brothers and sisters buried overseas in the famine and the bloodshed laid at your feet, because while you built your kingdom from selling their seed, your banks give cash when we all just need to breathe. You command them to run. Now they've broken their knees. And now it's just me and you. And I've read pamphlets and diaries. I know how you be. You'll point to the blackness of the sky and promise stars I can't see. You'll dislocate my knee and offer up your car. You'll point to your charity. I'll point to my scars. I've learned from these bars, these brokers, this silence. You don't need swords or walls. You make the wallet violent. I tried to free my mother, but you call me a tyrant, blocking out the noise of your IMF sirens who took the laws of guns and ships and made it about compliance and moving chips and passing bills. using their checks to control who won't and who will. And you know what? I can be violent too. I learned all that motherfucking shit from you. So if you don't want violence across this nation, then why not just grant me my emancipation? Thank you.
Well, CJ, I've got to say that was really powerful stuff. I feel I feel quite emotional hearing that. Yeah, so thank you so much for that really powerful spoken word. Thank you for the poignancy with which you've depicted empire, colonialism, and debt, but through a relational lens. Yeah, thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant. And like I said earlier, I think, yeah, if you could see people right now in person, they would all be clapping and probably like me, quite moved emotionally. So thank you for that. Let me take a breath. Right. Our next speaker is somebody that you might be familiar with, especially if you've been following our debt justice campaigns for a bit. Our next speaker is Precious Kalombwana, who is a Zambian activist who's involved in Fridays for Future, Debt for Climate in Zambia, and for several years now has been partnering with us at Debt Justice as well. So you may recognize her, you may recognize some of her story because she's been part of our Council of Debt campaign and been helping us to lobby for a new debt justice law in the UK. Which, you know, and if if they ever won that campaign and we get that law, then actually it would make a massive difference to the debt negotiations in countries like Zambia and Ghana. So yeah, we're really pleased to have Precious on the call, and I'm going to pass over to Precious now, and she can update us on the situation in Zambia and some of the campaigning work that she's been doing there.
Hello, everyone. This is Precious. I'm going to start with my story as a debt campaigner. And I think this time around on how I should start my story, I think I'm asking for just a 5-second, a moment of silence for the people who died because of they don't have access to medicine, for those people who are dying because of hunger, for those people who are impacted by the climate shocks. Just a moment of silence, just for 5 seconds. Thank you. I think the 5 seconds is up. I'm going to start my story on how my family is being affected by debt crisis. My father in 2022 was impacted by the floods. He doesn't have a home right now because of the floods that impacted Zambia. Also, how people are suffering. They don't have access to medicine. They don't have access to good education. Girls and women are the mostly affected. Girls are being married off because they don't have food on their table. They are being married off to gain maybe something like cows in exchange for them to have food on their table. And we are in a climate crisis. In 2024, the president of Zambia declared a climate emergency because of the droughts that we are facing. Zambia is one of the countries that depends on agriculture. Mostly of the southern part of Africa is also being affected by the droughts. Actually, right now in Zambia, we are being affected by the dates. We are calling out, we are demanding for date cancellation for Zambia, and also we are calling out for Black Clock to cancel the date that is being owned by Zambia. And also this time around, we had some actions in April during IMF and the World Bank annual meetings, where we delivered a letter to the World Bank. After just delivering a letter to the World Bank, some of the activists, 4 activists were arrested about 3 to 4 hours it was traumatizing for us as Zambians. It was very unfair for us activists to demand for our rights, and we were being arrested for our rights. And they told us, how can you call for these demands? These are the people who are driving the economy of Zambia. You need to stop these campaigns because you can't target these people. These people, they are big people. From that time, we were arrested. We sat down and said, we will not stop because Zambians are being affected. Zambians are suffering. Zambians are dying because of date issues. Zambians, they don't have access to medicine. Zambians, they don't have good quality education. And we need to fight this battle together as Zambian activists. And the last thing that I would say is, if Zambia's date is being cancelled, we will be able to have good education. We will be able to have medicine in hospitals. We will no longer suffer because of the date crisis. We also need everyone to be on our side because debt issues has trapped Zambia into suffering. And also going back to the story of our country and our village and the most towns, people are going hungry. Last year, at least people were eating once per day. This year, 2024, people, they are going hungry. People are dying because they don't have food on their table. It's unfortunate to say that I have the opportunity to say on this platform, because I was very happy when I was invited to be one of the panelists. This is the opportunity to say how we are being affected. It is an opportunity for me and other activists that are fighting for date cancellation and date justice. And I felt like this time around, I need to speak out. I need my voice to be heard, because last time when we had an action during our annual meeting of World Bank and IMF, we were listed. This time around, we're calling out the global North countries to stand with us, to fight with us, to demand for date cancellation, to demand for date justice. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Precious. Wow, just so insightful, like all of these speeches. That's quite incredible, because I know, we worked together on putting for the action on April, and knew of your arrest at the time. So thank you for all of the work that you do. So I'm really excited to bring you our final speaker, who's going to tell us about the situation in Kenya. Some of you may have seen in the news this year about the protests there, which created ripples throughout Africa. Justine Kapanga is a Debt for Climate youth coordinator. He's based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm going to pass to him now to explain the situation in Kenya and why people took to the streets early this year. Over to you, Justine.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and every one of you here. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. Actually, I'm only here to try and demystify the current state of affairs in Kenya. As you've all seen, for the past 3 months, Kenya has had push and pulls, political instability since June up to this point. So I wanted to try and make us understand the exact thing happening in Kenya as far as debt crisis is concerned. So in early June, or up to mid-June, we had introduction of the Finance Bill 2024-2025, which is a draft and an amendment of the previous Finance Bill. But now this new Finance Bill 2024-2025 came in with very, very oppressive policies that were, very oppressive to the common mwananchi, the common citizen, because now there was imposition of new taxes, rising of the VAT for common commodities which are used daily by citizens. And so life would be very unbearable with that new finance bill. But now this finance bill, the source of it and the biggest advisor of how it came up to be and how it was drafted was the World Bank and the IMF. Because now Kenya, since the year 2010, has been borrowing both bilaterally and from IMF and the World Bank. And so our debt has really accumulated to a verge of around 11 trillion as per now. And so the government, with advice from the World Bank and the IMF, thought it fit to, introduce a new finance bill that imposes so many taxes on the citizens. But now that did not go well with the citizens. Actually, we came out in large numbers to occupy the streets, to occupy Nairobi city, which is our capital city. People traveled from all over the country, from every part of the country, from the northern part, the southern part. People came to occupy Nairobi city. And actually, on the 25th of June, we occupied the parliament chambers of the Nairobi city, demanding that as Debt for Climate, we were demanding that the IMF and the World Bank cancel those debts, because those debts were the major reason as to why we had that very oppressive finance bill. So we went to the streets, we took to the streets, we occupied that parliament building, and the pressure really increased. We went to the streets for 3 weeks consecutively on every Tuesday and Thursday, but it was really traumatizing because now there was, police brutality. We had even the US interfere with those protests, because we even saw the US Army coming to the streets to beat up and tear gas as protesters. But we were really trying to, drive the narrative and drive the message that IMF and the World Bank should exit Kenya, and not only Kenya, but even, other countries in the global south, which are really suffering from debt crisis just because of those debts, which ideally it is them who owe us. And so we really put the pressure, but it was really traumatizing, because even at some point, because we were personally with my counterparts from Debt for Climate Movement of Kenya, we were a group, and at some point I even saw, a colleague whom we were protesting being shot dead. I remember on that day, even a counterpart of ours who we work closely with, she's a woman from a certain CPO. She had her child, a 7-year-old child, shot 7 times with rubber bullets at the back. And it was really traumatizing. We had a very tough time. But after the 3 weeks of demonstrations and inputting the pressure, finally the government dropped that finance. So it was actually dropped, and they had to now adopt a new one, which was even more accommodative to the common citizen. But the fight was not over, because our main goal and aim is to kick out IMF and the World Bank out of Kenya and the global south, and to have them cancel those debts. So we continued, and in August, we brought together our troops once again, and had a workshop and a training to try and come up with innovative and creative ideas to advocate. Because now we realized they had noticed that taking to the streets every week, they would tear gas us and we would lose the numbers. So we had to come up with creative ideas. We came up with ideas like coming up with culture songs, coming up with art pieces, or driving the message on debt cancellation. And so we decided now to merge going to the streets with online advocacy. And so we've really been trying to push this campaign online. I know it has really trended across the world, and not only in Kenya, but we saw the same thing happening even in Nigeria, and we were so happy about it. We saw it happening in Uganda the other day, and we were so happy about it, because now it's a movement, and people are now getting informed that we are not only rejecting the government, but the government of the day, but we are rejecting the IMF and the World Bank, because as far as the government has their mistakes in that debt crisis because of corruption and such kind of things, but the root cause is the IMF and the World Bank, and that is the message that we are trying to do. So we've really tried to carry on the campaign since June, July, August, and now in October. Actually, apparently, as I speak today, there's a Senate sitting on impeachment of the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. The National Assembly passed the motion, and now it's in the tail end, that is the Senate. We are almost impeaching that Deputy President because he's very corrupt, and he's taking part in coming up with those, oppressive policies, which they are now inputting in the finance bill, which is making life so unbearable in Kenya. So our fight continues, but I really urge us who are here tonight, you join us in our fight online, because we've realized, when we merge the physical protests and the online sensitization, it really works good, because I can tell you for sure right now in Kenya, even someone who did not know about IMF and the World Bank, they have an idea about it. And so that's what we're trying to do. So I'll call upon all of us who are here to try and see how we can come up with solidarity and push this message of debt, being debt free online, in X, in Instagram, and all other social media platforms. For Debt for Climate Movement of Kenya, and generally, our handles are Debt for Climate Kenya in X, Debt for Climate Global. Debt for Climate, that is the global chapter, and Debt for Climate Kenya for the X chapter. So I ask you guys, you join us in this movement, because we began it all the way from June. We are still pushing on. After the Deputy President, we are going for the President. And finally, I believe it will be a very tough fight, but I believe finally we shall be able to do away with the IMF and the World Bank in Kenya. And that will be the starting point of doing away with the IMF and the World in the global South country. So those are my remarks for tonight. So I'll just ask you guys to join us in social media to amplify the voices, so that at the end of the day, we get to succeed in this country. Thank you very much for your time and for your audience, and let's continue fighting. Thank you.
Thanks, Justine. Justine, it's just incredibly moving stories that we have heard tonight. We have been treated to an amazing range of speakers, spoken word and song. So tonight is all about marking these powerful acts of resistance and finding ways to stand in solidarity with the debt activists like our speakers tonight. We're going to have some time to put your questions to our speakers in just a few minutes. So if you haven't already done so, please pop your questions in the chat, and we hope we have time to answer most of them. In the meantime, just a quick reminder of how you can show support and solidarity for the activists that we have heard from tonight. First, we are calling for a new debt justice law in the UK that would force private lenders to the table in debt negotiations, and it would prevent them from getting more in these negotiations than other lenders. So we're sharing debt justice action targeting the government in the chat now. Please sign it if you haven't already. And if you have already signed, you can take 2 minutes now to send it on to 3 of your contacts or share it on your social media. Secondly, we want you to join Debt for Climate. Come and attend one of our onboarding sessions. We have chapters in over 30 countries. You will see the link in the chat to register, or you can just head to our website, debtforclimate.org. And thirdly, we have a digital day of action called 80 Years Are Enough. And that goes live on the 25th of October. The IMF and World Bank, who you have heard from a lot tonight, are meeting in Washington, D.C. between the 21st and the 26th of October for their 80th meeting. And there are protests happening globally. The link to our digital action will be posted in the chat, so you can get involved on the 25th of October. Note, if you click on this link, it will show an active campaign, because that's when we want it to go live. So mark it in your diaries with the link, and let's put further pressure on the IMF and World Bank to say 80 years are enough and we need to cancel the debt. So there are many questions to go through. So I'm going to pass over to Heidi to kick off the Q&A. Over to you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, so on the questions, we're going to do a couple of round of questions. Each round will have about two or three questions. So I'll kick off with this first round. So we have a question from David Kenvin, who says, how do we ensure that countries are not held responsible for the odious debts incurred by their governments? That is, debt incurred for the oppression of that people of a country, or debt incurred for the enrichment of the ruling elite, not the benefit of the country. And the second question is, what stopped Suriname driving a bargain more in its own favour? The third question in this round would be, what would be the impact for people in Kenya if the debt was cancelled? So maybe the first question about odious debts, maybe Melani could take that question. There's a question about what stops Suriname from driving a bargain in its own favour. Maybe Sharda can answer that. And then Justine, could you answer the question about the impact of people in Kenya if the debt was cancelled?
Yeah, Lauren, should I go first or?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you, Melanie.
I actually typed half of it on the chat as well, so I'll try not to repeat the same things. So the question of odious debt is one of the crucial challenges that we are currently faced with, because in Sri Lanka, we had this set of leaders who've been taking loans or who've been taking debt without accountability and without transparency. And we also have private sector who are also contributors to this whole crisis by sending foreign reserve earnings out of the country. So in terms of understanding how the debt, how this debt become odious debt, it would have to happen through an independent audit that is being done in the country. And for that to happen, we need a government with a political will. And all this time, we had the same leaders who were responsible for creating this same crisis as our leaders. So we've just had a new opening where we are still very hopeful that this government will have the political will in order to do this this independent audit, that's transparent audit, in order to find out who's responsible, who's accountable. And also, like, we have several records that have gone missing from the entries in the Auditor General Department. So that's like, we need honest leaders to conduct this audit. And on the second part of this is we need global infrastructure put in place to hold these corrupt politicians or the corrupt officials who took the debt accountable, and also the creditors who provided debt to Sri Lanka, knowing, or not Sri Lanka, like, any country, knowing that they're not able to pay back, knowing that they cannot bear these high interest rates with the struggles within the country. I'd also like to mention that Sri Lanka has gone to IMF 17 times now, right? And we only received independence in 1948. So within 70 years, we've got 70 odd years, we've gone to IMF for 17 times. And that goes to show that this structure of this financial architecture does not work, right? And so to answer the question again, like, we need both local and international frameworks in place, and the political will and honest leadership to achieve this. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Melanie. Can I call on Sharda to answer the question about Suriname? I'll just repeat the question for you. What stops Suriname having a bargain more in its own favour?
I actually wanted to start by saying, well, the same applies to Suriname. Much of what Melanie was saying. I think if you look closely at countries like ours, you'll see the same scenario playing over and over again. But putting that aside, the question was what kept us from driving a better bargain. It was a collection of factors. First of all, we had already defaulted on the loan, so that put us in a quite a bad spot, because we had already defaulted without consulting anybody or anything. When the new government came, they just said, "Oh, we're not going to pay anything anymore," and that, within a year, they were again with their back against the wall. Then you have this circle of lenders, creditors, and the IMF. This game that was being played, where the IMF said, one of the things you need to do before you can enter into our program is that you need to deal with your creditors. You need to enter debt negotiations. And the lenders said, you need to strike a deal with IMF first. We need to be ensured that the IMF is in country so that there's some form of oversight before we will strike a deal with you. So, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The third factor that played a role, and that is totally based on Projekta, my organization's understanding, so unofficially, is that we have a lack of capacity and understanding of how to negotiate, how to deal with these global lenders, with these global institutions, and with these private lenders. It requires a level of technical understanding and negotiations that we simply don't have. We paid for it. We hired some foreign companies to negotiate for us. We paid them a few million, and this was the result. So it's also a lack of understanding of the government that if you look beyond governments, and there's a whole opportunity of technical assistance from, for example, civil society in other countries, and activists that can help you in driving a better bargain. But yeah, so it's a couple of factors.
Thank you, Sharda, for that. And then just for the final question in this round is for Justine. What would be the impact for people in Kenya if debt was cancelled?
Thank you once again. On the impact of debt cancellation for Kenya, as I mentioned, the main cause of why life is very difficult in Kenya is because of the debt crisis that we are in. Because the greatest share of GDP, the greatest share of our income goes to servicing these loans. So number one, if these debts are cancelled, we are going to have our taxes. Taxes like the pay, which is so high right now. Actually, some people are really complaining and even think that leaving that tax to the government is even better than getting your share from getting your share after taxation, because it's really oppressive. Taxes like the VAT, the value added tax, they are really high. They have gotten to 16% even for the basic commodities, making life so unbearable for even the common the common citizens. Number two, if these debts are cancelled, we are going to have money circulating in Kenya, because as I mentioned, a lot of money is going to servicing these loans. And when we have our money and retain it within Kenya, we are going to even have our country get to develop even faster. As you know, Kenya is still a developing country. We really have a lot of challenges when it comes to infrastructure. A lot of roads are undone. A lot of schools are not in very good conditions. Even some hospitals are, dilapidated and poorly equipped. But if these debts are cancelled, it means that all our revenue will be retained and, maintained within Kenya, and that means more supply of cash in the economy, and the government is even going to have an easier time to develop our country to the next level. Thirdly, we need, that is going to give us financial sovereignty as a country. Again, as I mentioned, the biggest share of our revenue is going to servicing these loans. And now that means as a country, we don't have that financial sovereignty, because yes, we get revenue from taxes, but the biggest share of these taxes and this revenue end up, paying loans to China, to IMF, to the World Bank. You see, that denies us that financial sovereignty as a country. And so if these debts are cancelled today, I can assure you we are really going to have a tremendous change in Kenya as a country. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Justine. So moving on to next three questions. This one on war is for Bernard. It's from Justin in the chat. I've heard that developing countries pay 10 times the interest rate of rich countries, even though the risks of loans are not that different. Is this true? And if so, why? Over to you, Bernard.
Thank you for that question. Yes, generally, I don't know if it's exactly 10 times more, but it's certainly high. Ghana's debt in terms of interest rate ranges between 7 to 10.75%, 10.75%. So that is quite high. And that is a significant portion of the debt, and that really puts a lot of burden on developing countries. I want to give a scenario. For instance, if you take, for example, Greece, even with all its problems in 2018, at the same comparative level, borrowed at 1.8%, whilst Ghana borrowed at 8.63%. So at the same rate, if Ghana borrowed $2.5 billion over 30 years. Ghana is paying about $7.3 billion overall period, while Greece will be paying only $1.6 billion over the same period. So it tells you that if a developed country, the difference in terms of how much you'll be paying out as this. But if you look at the risk, I don't think Ghana has had different risks as compared to Greece at the time that it was defaulting on its debt. But the interest rate is still, quite high for developing countries compared to developed countries. So
it feels like we might have lost Bernard there. It could be his connectivity, I'm guessing. Lorraine, should we move on to the second question in your round?
So the next question we've got is for Precious. Do you think that resistance against the debt crisis is growing across the global south and lower income countries? Precious.
Firstly, global south countries are the most affected by the debt crisis. Right now, the debt crisis in the global south, they are growing because our government, they are still borrowing. Even the previous government from Zambia, they have already borrowed a lot of money. So the debt crisis is still growing. Thank you.
Thanks, Precious. Just do spotlight. Okay. So our next question is from Chip from Netherlands. Hello, Chip. This is for Sharda. Do you see a specific role for activist groups in the Netherlands, such as Debt for Climate, to support the struggle for debt justice in Suriname? Thanks, Chip.
To you. I think it's Yip.
Is it Yip?
Hi, Yip. Well, if he's Dutch, I also Yip. I started smiling when I read the question. Where to start? Well, first of all, it's not a funny question. I'm really thankful for the question, because at least you asked the question. Because sometimes it shows that you understand that there's a delicate balance when it comes to the relationship between former colonizer and the colonized. in trying to achieve something together, and in building relationships and how we can move forward. So at this moment, it's something I would have to think about, because if you follow the news in Suriname and you're a bit familiar with the relationship between our countries, especially given your new government as well, you may have an understanding of the of how careful we need to tread in Suriname when we engage with Dutch activist groups, because if it's not to the liking of governments or to the liking of other politicians, the Surinamese activists or the Surinamese groups will be seen as well, meehuilen met de vijand. How do you call it? This, in English, is that you're joining the colonizers. You're speaking the colonizers' language. So it's a very delicate balance we have to address. But I'm very, very happy to discuss this with you in a chat, and see how we can be how we can work out something that is of value to us all. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharda. Over to you, Heidi.
I was wondering if Bernard's back on the webinar. Bernard, if you're back, maybe you can finish off the answer to the question that we kind of lost you halfway through your answer. Do you want to?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So I was saying that yes, it's true in the sense that the average borrowing rate in Ghana and most developing countries around between 8 to 9% compared to in developing countries, which is between 0 and 1%. And I gave an example of Greece, in where Greece was also having debt challenges, but yet borrowed at 1.8%, whilst Ghana was borrowing at 8.6% when Ghana did not have any debt crisis. So clearly, the rate at which developing countries are borrowing is one of the biggest problems, why our debt problem continues to escalate. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much for that, Bernard. And sorry that you kind of lost connectivity a bit just then. I think we've come to the end of our time that we have for questions, and I just want to say really sorry if we didn't get round to your question this evening, but we also want to respect your time. We know it's evening, so we do want to finish on time at 7:30. So yeah, I just want to say a really big thank you to all of you for coming this evening. I want to say thank you to our speakers and to the poets as well. We've learned so much about what's happening on the ground for people living in those countries with a debt crisis. Just want to say thank you so much to our speakers for really explaining the political context, but also really showing us how personal this is. And, you know, some people may say that debt is too technical to understand, but actually it's really just about people's lives, human rights, dignity. It's about justice. So we really want to offer each of our speakers this evening, you know, our solidarity for your resistance, your protest, your campaigning and your activism. Things are dire. Our speakers have shown us what it's like living with the legacy of colonialism and living in a world dominated by neocolonialism, neocolonialist rules. But we also know that change is possible, and we have won debt cancellation before, and we know that when we come together, we can do it again. Next year is a particularly important year in the fight for debt justice. Many faith groups, activist groups, campaigning organizations are gearing up for a really big campaign next year. It's been 25 years since the original Jubilee 2000 campaign, the Drop the Debt campaign, as it was called sometimes as well, where this campaign managed to win large-scale debt cancellation, which saw about $130 billion worth of debt cancelled for lower-income countries. Groups around the world are already planning how to make next year really count for debt justice. So we really encourage you, please, if you're interested in taking part in this big global campaign next year, please sign up to receive our emails, and you'll get updates and information on the campaign. And in the meantime, we really hope you've enjoyed the event tonight. Please sign up to Debt Justice Petition. The links are going up on the chat right now. Please follow Debt for Climate on all of their social media platforms. The links are going in the chat box right now. So you can continue the conversation. You can continue to follow the campaign by signing up and following Debt Justice and Debt for Climate. And if you've signed up to receive our mailings, then we'll also be sharing a recording of this event tonight in the next few weeks. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. So goodbye from us at Debt Justice and from our friends at Debt for Climate.